All right, y'all. Intro, name, pronouns, role, and then I'm still hungry. So favorite lunch item. Michael, don't say anything. My check-in questions are always about food for some reason.
Only when I haven't eaten either. That's
I'm
why
so
you do it.
hungry, so I need ideas. I'm Abisha. I am with OPCD for temporarily and working on supporting some of the EDI projects, but my main kind of work is with the Red Barn Ranch property, trying to figure out what to do. She, her pronouns, and favorite food item or lunch item. It's been quesadilla, because it's just like quick to make, not too bad, like just in and out. So that's me. I'm just gonna go on my screen. So M, Natalie, Carol, and then Michael.
Hi, I'm Em. I'm with Sustainable Seattle, co-director with Natalie. We've been fiscally sponsoring this project since its start. And my favorite lunch item is soup, any kind of soup that I can have. I'm a soup person all day, every day.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I use they, she pronouns. I am also the co-director with M for Sustainable Seattle. I was going to say I am like a lunch item, but I'm not. So I think my favorite lunch item are like these onigiri, like rice ball lentil things that they sell, I think at Wajimaya, and they're deep fried and they're really good. It's indulgent, but yeah.
Hello, my name is Carol, and I am the founder slash lead consultant on BIPOC Stack project. I'm also the owner of Kayla for Art. My favorite lunch item, I would have to go with M, especially in Seattle, is soup. I've been eating a lot of it lately and just really excited about it right now because of all the rain and how cold it's been. But it's actually really nice outside right now, though. A little bit different.
I love that you looked behind you and we're seeing you looking at a beach and saying it's really nice outside.
It's really nice outside right now.
It looks great. Michael Blumson, he, him pronouns, work with the Equitable Development Initiative, as you all know. And I was sitting on a grants panel this morning for the Office of Arts and Culture all morning, simply thinking about how to sneak away and get a chicken shawarma from this like little place next door, and I have not made it. And so Abisha is going to be in my doghouse for the rest of the week because I'm literally having trouble talking because my mouth is watering so much from what you've all said right now. So thanks Abisha, thanks.
You know, it's more motivation to make this meeting, move faster. Make people, hunger makes us do that. So thank you all for sharing that. Now I'm in the mood for soup. So I might make a quick trip. So we can just jump right in. Michael, last meeting that we had, Em had a question about, what is the options around like land use for the property. So I'm actually going to turn it to Em to frame that question, but that's gonna be what we discuss in the next couple of minutes, and then have your expertise, because I was like, I am not the person for that, and then we'll just go into updates. So I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah. So just to provide, again, like build off that and provide a little more context. So we had been having a series of conversations around this project in terms of not only building the housing and figuring out kind of where everything can go and the logistics in terms of that, but also just the land use model. So we had a meeting with Curtis, the partner from Brighton Development Group, and he was mentioning the possibility of condominiumizing and really emphasizing, like, particularly when working with Black communities and communities of color, like this is the way to go, blah, 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 blah. And that was the first I'd ever heard of that. So obviously I've heard, and I'm not a land use expert, I'm a keyboard paper pusher, like that's mostly my thing. But I wanted to get better insight and understanding about what are the different models. Of course, I hear a lot of talk about CLTs and see a lot of organizations moving in that direction, and a lot of particularly groups of color. Heard this conversation about condominiumizing. There's been some other conversations about just kind of like building Black homeowner wealth and, like, you know, Black families and households buying properties in the neighborhood, and then establishing affordable housing models by putting like tiny houses in the backyard so that people can really make use of the land and it can be shared and things like that. So I wanted to know from you, as someone who's really in the weeds of this conversation, what has been explored? What is kind of the movement moving towards right now, particularly when working with Black communities in Seattle? Has there been conversation around these different models? What has been kind of like torn through, and where are people moving towards at this point? If you can help us like get some of that inside of conversations that are already in motion.
Yeah, I'll try. I mean, I would say that there's, for many years, has been a lot of talk about what to do and why to do. There hasn't been a lot of like, okay, we've actually like, we've got our model and we've like designed it that way. And some of that is because, you know, traditional financing streams sort of nudge you back into the lane that everybody else understands. And some of it is that like all of the other stuff is just way more work. And so like, if you're not willing to spend the time to put in all of that stuff up front, you're not going to, you know, by the time the financing hits, you're not going to, you know, you're not going to be in a position to actually direct it into the stream you want. I mean, I think the condos are, you know, you know, generally, I think people kind of understand a condo is the airspace rights in a building or something else, and you can get sort of creative and complicated about how you want to do that. And you know, a lot of the big questions around the condos is like, when you set one up, there are multiple people who own condos that are attached to this land, and so you have this sort of condo association that is sort of your governance entity. And, you know, that comes with what they're called CC&Rs, which stands for Codes, Covenants, and Restrictions, which is sort of the legal document that attaches to the condo and says, this is how the condo is going to be governed. So, dog. And, you know, that's where the governance lift comes in. And, you know, in the private sector, the developer just gives you those. And that's, you just sort of buy into it, and then you know, the homeowners association or whatever can adjust those once it's set up, you know, and each condo owner is sort of a voting member of this thing, and it's whatever that, you know, however that's organized then to make decisions. And so they tend to be sort of in that nonprofit mold. You elect a governance, you know, you elect your condo association board, and they make decisions about the shared spaces, which is hallways and the exterior of the building. And if they're good, you don't have something like what happens in Florida, where, you know, nobody does any repairs ever, and then the building falls down.
So is that the HOA model?
Yeah.
The home association. Okay.
Yeah.
And how is that different from co-op model?
Sure. So the co-op model, so the example, there are not a lot of co-ops out here. There's a few, like Apex or Ajax, that's on First Avenue in Belltown, is a co-op. So there's a few out there.
There's actually quite a lot of artist co-ops, actually. There's one
Yeah.
on Capitol Hill. I know of a couple. I know of at least like 3 or 4 in
Yeah.
Seattle.
Yeah, there's a few. They're generally, up till now, have been relatively small. And part of that again is a financing issue because a co-op is set up where instead of like owning your unit, you own a share in the co-op. So it's a little more like theoretical exactly what you're doing. And you know,
So you don't actually own the space. So like if
Right.
it were the tiny house, they would not own the house, they would actually own the share as opposed to the
Right. And then you sort of like lease your space from the co-op, which comes with your share. And I'm a little vague on some of this because like I haven't actually seen anybody get all the way through that. The one that is probably the most interesting at the moment is the limited equity co-op that Homesite's trying to put together. That's part of the Othello Square project, but the parcel to the south. That should actually, they're getting close. They're using a HUD financing tool that not even HUD remembered that they had. So everybody's having to like learn how to do it again because they're like, wait, how does this work? But they're getting pretty close to pulling that together. And that I think a lot of us are going to learn a lot about. Because it's like, okay, how does this actually work? But they've gone through issues because, thanks, Natalie. You know, a lot of the banks are like, we don't understand, like, how is a share collateral? Like, how do we foreclose on a share? Like, how do we do this? So from their perspective, it's like, you know, on the East Coast, people kind of know how to do it because New York has so many of them. So you have like a different kind of finance system that understands them a little better. Here, people haven't quite got their head around it. So that's, I think, and they've been at this for like, I don't know, 7-8 years, trying to get this figured out. How do you actually set this up? So a lot of us are kind of looking at that as like, okay, like you're taking one for the team here and you're going to learn some lessons. But hopefully we can collectively kind of understand like what actually happens here. And you know, can people exit? Can other people buy? How does, you know, in their case, the limited equity calculation, you know, how does that value accrue? And is that does that actually turn out to be useful to anybody, right? Like, is this symbolic, but great, I got $5 back after living there, you know, like it's not a meaningful wealth generating activity.
Do you know, sorry, quick question. Do
Yeah.
you know why the Homesite project chose a co-op model instead of condos?
Well, one is because they had I don't know this for sure, but they definitely had a condo project explode once. So there may have been some hesitancy, and also I think they really wanted to test the model, right? I mean, I think they sort of said we're a big like we're a big enough organization to possibly pull this off, and have people come to the table and take a chance on it. And they were willing to put in you know, just sit with it for the years and years and years and years that it took. And I think they were responding to community sort of saying like, we want something different. You know, and some of it, I think the theory is that it allows a different price point of ownership, right? Like you can acquire a share possibly cheaper than you could acquire, you know, the air rights. Again, this is sort of a thing that we will be interesting to see, how that actually plays out, you know, once the building's actually constructed and what the financing tools they can pull together to get that price down. But I think the idea is that the buy-in would be lower than it might be as a condo.
Okay.
So when you
Buy
say
it.
air rates, what do you mean by that? Is that just like a phrase?
Sure. Well, that's
Describe
so like,
condo?
yeah. And all of these take a little bit of like what exactly am I talking about? Which is why there's so many lawyers involved, is because none of us actually understand what we're talking about. But basically a condo is just the airspace, really. That's kind of what you own. And so you have this building and it's basically, right.
I don't know
like,
what you mean by airspace though.
Oh, sure. So you
I
have
don't know
you
what
have,
that
you
term
know, you have
means.
your land.
Sorry.
And yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that. You see, like on a residential building, you have a building that looks like an apartment. And the condo association basically owns the exterior of the building and the land. And then each unit, right, is, 10 feet up and however many feet wide and however many feet long, that if the building wasn't there would be sitting in the air, right? And it's stacked all the way up. And so you're buying that space that then your unit inhabits. And so, in most like affordable housing projects, there'll be, even in the apartments, you have the ground floor, which is a condo of its own, and then you have the upper 5 or 6 stories, which is a separate condo unit. And that's right. It's the airspace is what's owned because there's not land. The land is already owned by the condo. So in order to give you sort of get this illusory property by virtue of magical law stuff that now says you have this when you don't actually own the land. The condo association owns the land.
And
Go
sorry,
ahead,
sorry.
Em. Go ahead, Em, because you have to leave anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I could stay on a little bit later than I thought I could. I want to get through as much as I can, but I do have another appointment. So a clarification question. So you said when the CCR, you said that in the private sector, the developer gives you the CCR. So what is the relationship between the developer and the condo association? Like the developer owns the land, the condo association owns the land. Can you just speak a little bit more about how that
Sure.
works?
So generally, and again, in community development stuff, we make it more complicated because we have a whole host of other reasons. In the private sector, the developer wants to be gone as fast as possible, right? So their job is like, I'm setting up this condo association so that, and I own all the condos. And then I'm selling them as quickly as I can, and you all are buying them, and then you've replaced me and I'm gone. So, the developer doesn't want to have anything to do with it because the faster they're out, the quicker their liability for the building being built incorrectly disappears, right? So they want to leave as quickly as possible and turn all of that over to the home buyers. In nonprofits, that gets more complicated because, if your interest is public uses of some kind, then you might want to remain involved somehow. And so that, this sort of leads to this land trust question of what is a land trust? And typically a land trust is sort of like a condo where the land trust owns the land and then leases the building, and essentially the air rights. But instead of selling the air rights to a condo, you're just doing a lease to the homeowner, who then gets full use of it. But you have the land trust sitting on the side. So when they sell, the land trust can enforce and say, well, you can't sell it for, if they're like Homestead will say, you have to sell according to our model. And we're going to enforce that. So if we catch you trying to do something, we can step in and do something about that. But that means they have to be there monitoring, having an infrastructure to be able to monitor every time one of their houses flips, so that they can enforce that right, because otherwise nobody would ever notice necessarily.
And the difference between a land trust and a co-op, some of it sounds like it's scale, that a land trust could be like vast properties of land, different houses on them, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no different, you could do either at whatever scale you want. I think there's probably a point for a cooperative where you have too many shareholders to be able to make decisions anymore. Land trusts can get there because a lot of times, one of the features of a really strong land trust is that there's certain decisions that like the board can't make. So I think for Homestead, if you buy into the land trust, you're a member of the land trust. And so there's certain questions that come up that are like, the membership gets a vote. So anyone who owns a homestead vote has some roles in the governance structure. And that's why there's there can be some overlap in how they work. It's more about like, there's no shares in land, instead of that, you have, you're leasing your building or your space from the, you know, from the land trust instead of. And so it's possible, I mean, it's possible, I haven't seen this happen. I don't know of anybody who's really seen it happen, but you could have a land trust that is then leasing to a cooperative that then is selling shares, right? So you can potentially stack things and make things more complicated. The reason you don't see these is most people are like, why would I do this to myself? But there may be, you know, there may be a reason within the values and goals of what you're trying to do where that sort of makes sense, where you're like, this group of people gets decisions over this and they have this kind of autonomy, but we want this check and balance. Because like one of the things you start seeing in New York is that the cooperatives at a certain point are like, yeah, I know we said we were going to be affordable, but this thing's worth a ton of money now. And we're just going to sell it off, right? And there isn't a check and balance. And so maybe that's where, like, if it had been a land trust underneath, you would have had an independent party that could have actually tried to step in and say, that's not actually what the goals of this was.
Yeah, and I think from that perspective, it would make sense why somebody who wants to like hold that land for profit might not want to go into a land trust because they want to be able to make a profit. Whereas condominiums, you can, if you're zoned for condominiums, and then in like 10 years, you want to gain that capital gain or that interest on the equity, then you can sell it off.
Right. You know, and yeah, it's hard, right? Because all of these things aren't like open and shut, right? You want people to have autonomy. You want people to create wealth. And so you can't create wealth and then turn around and say, but actually we're closing all the doors and you don't actually have the agency to be able to access it ever again. But you also want to create affordability and maintain that. And so, you know, that's where I think that's why there ends up being a lot of people being like, I don't actually, these are really hard questions. And it's hard for people to sort of sometimes move forward. And what I think I see a lot is we kind of talked about it, but we wanted the project to move forward. Okay, well, the project's going to be built this way now because like the money came in before our conversation and everybody is like, how are you doing this? I need to write up contracts. We need to like figure this out. And then you end up with condos or other things because, it's the fastest and the cheapest way to get your building up. And then you try to back in your values later a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is it possible that like, if you like, is it possible to write in the land trust, like we will be able to sell if it like sell the land at this price, even if it like gets, adds equity up to like a threshold to make it like to still be able to get some money from the land, but like some equity from the land, but then cap it at like a certain price so that it's not, unaffordable. Do you see what I'm saying? That was kind of a weird question.
Yeah, I think I understand, but I might not. So if this doesn't answer it at all, then feel free to. I mean, I think you can set whatever resale formula you want to. So Homestead's got theirs, and they've, and I think they're, the few times I've checked in with them recently, they sort of have this question that they're struggling with, which was this resale formula was designed in a very different market. And maybe, like on both sides, it's no longer working, which is why I think they're struggling so much, right? Because like, okay, we keep it affordable, but it's of no value to anybody, or right, like, but the people who are selling now can't go to a starter home, right? So that's the other side of it, is they're stuck and they can't get out of it.
I would like to respond to that because so I just had a really awesome interview with Lopez Island Land Trust, Sandy there, and their land trust has been around for 31 years. And actually all land trusts don't actually work that way. They're all very different, and it depends on how you actually structure them. And their model is actually where when you buy into it, you actually do own the home. and you're
Mm.
building like, I think it's 3% equity. So you actually are building equity. It's just not the same amount of equity that you would be building if you actually owned a traditional home
Mhm.
on your own land, right? And what she has seen happen over the 30 years is that what ends up occurring is that because your mortgage is cheaper and everybody's pooling into the same pot, that 3% builds slower, and it's a smaller amount, but folks can pull it out at different varying points, right? So you can
Hmm.
pull out a chunk of money and do something with that. And over the 30 years, what's happened is because folks have an affordable housing situation, they end up pulling out the equity and using that equity to actually build their own business. So now almost everybody in their land trust owns a business, and all of the resources and skill sets that they need to actually lift up and prop up their land trust is extremely stabilized, because they don't have to go outside of the land trust to get the services and the resources that they need. So I would definitely look
Yeah.
at that, or their model, or talk to her. But I recorded that conversation as well. I'll send you the link once I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
So it's just very interesting, because she's the second person. There was another land trust that I also talked to as well, and it's very interesting because everybody, you can set it up very differently. They're not all the same at all.
Right.
Which is why I'm having these conversations with multiple people, just because. And the same with like public development. Is it the public development agencies? Those are different. Co-ops they're all different. They just have a very skeleton kind of, these are the things that kind of identify each one of them, but most folks are building them all very differently. So it's just, I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, Evergreen Land Trust is the ones who worked with Clear the Land, so they have their side. My sense is they're kind of in between the two, like a little bit of like we're sort of more collective owner-ish. But their attorney was having trouble explaining to me exactly how it worked too. So I was like, I don't know that I fully understand. But your point is well, right. It's like how do you balance all these competing objectives to do different things, and there's a lot of different trade-offs you have to make as you're sort of navigating how you want to set it up. So you're on mute.
I'm also really curious about the long-term differences between all three of those models. Like, could you talk a little bit about that, like the long-term implications? Because like when you're talking about the condos, one of the things that kind of, like, I'm down with that model, but the flip side of that coin is what you just said, that they could be sold at any time to anybody at any time. And I don't know that that's the model that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, like, what are the long-term implications according to your viewpoint?
And that's where it gets super confusing for everybody, right? Because long term is like sometimes it's like, well, we have to, wait and see what happens to understand what the long term's right. And the tax credit program is full of this, of like, we set up these deals and then we had to wait 15 years to see what happened, right? Like, and then we were like, oh, let's not do that again. Right. But it took that, there's that much lead time. I think, to my perspective, it would be that the main questions are like, who has control of what decisions? Right. And the condo is usually designed to be like the homeowner has the most control, right? They can do whatever they want. You can try to, like, in theory, you could try to have some power in the homeowners association to say, well, you can do these things and you cannot do these things. And you'll see this sometimes where you have homeowners associations that say, only a certain percentage can be rented out, because we want a mix, we want a certain percentage of this or that. And you certainly have homeowners associations that are sort of tyrannical about, you can do, you can't have doormats and you can't have art on your door and you can't do this or that, right? Because they're guarding property value of everybody else in their, like, not particularly creative way of viewing the world. You know, and then shares, again, you know, I know from the experience of New York where there's some danger points of, you know, if you can get enough shareholders to agree to do something, in theory, you know, majority rules in how that's governed. And there really isn't a check and balance. So that, you know, the shareholders can just eject their governance structure in theory. And you know, could you do things like these certain decisions require 2/3 votes? And, you know, I mean, like, I think there's ways to be creative about all of that, but there's not a third party involved still. But there's more of a restriction on what people can do with their unit because it's not your unit. You're just selling a share in this thing that you sort of gives you the ability to get, you know, have access to your space exclusively. And then on the CLT side, there's like this clear delineation of there's two entities that are in relationship. You know, you as the owner and then the land trust, and, you know, how the land trust operates and what that relationship is. But what I understand to be universal, and I think this is true for Lopez, right, is that like the land trust owns your land and then you are in relationship and you get the building and you get all of that asset value, and however you do your calculation, whether it's 3% or a more complicated formula. But because you can't really sell, because it's not a condo, right? If it was a condo, they would own the land and you would own the building above it and you could just sell it off. But because it's a lease, you're stuck in a relationship, which means that the CLT has the ability to enforce things in a way that might not otherwise do. And then, you know, who is a member and who can vote on what decisions, and, you know, is there an executive board that can do certain things to keep it running, and you don't have to call a general member meeting to like apply for grants or buy a new, you know, but that's all decided sort of in the inner workings of the organization. And that's kind of that's sort of how I distinguish on a high level basis, kind of what those are, if that's helpful.
Yes, that is. Thank you.
Oh, great. And then I guess while you're thinking of your next question, there's this other element that people are now talking about, which is all these community investment trust things. You know, and I think the Mercy Corps thing down in Portland is the example that people like to throw around, which is a whole nother element, because it's like, okay, well, now people who don't live there are like investing in a pool to help you buy it, and then they get a return as an investor. So like, you know, they you know, this pool of investors owns your condo and then you buy it from them, or at least, you know, and so you're pushing the value of the building out into community more because people can make small. And so theirs is, you know, about commercial spaces. And so they have this like kind of mini mall, strip mall thing that they own. And, you know, all of these people in community came together to invest in it. And then you know, they developed this system. And so there's a couple people talking about that. And there's a lot of council people who are talking about that. And then at some point, everybody realizes that you have to have a lot of negotiation with the SEC about it. And that's usually where things slow down precipitously. And you know, the question there is, a lot of the question around, you know, that everybody has is sort of, how do you keep low income people from getting scammed, right? Because it'd be really, really easy to create one of these, soak up a bunch of people who don't have the expertise to do their due diligence, and then just walk away.
Yeah.
And so
I
that's why the regulators get all weird about it.
totally. I have to hop off. I want to just like ask a question and then I'm going to have to leave before it gets answered. But because of what you just brought up, I think that that's really important. That's been something that's been on my mind a lot, that if we don't have lawyers and things like that, like how do we move forward with something and create a system where we're not inadvertently creating something where people can get taken advantage of. And I think a decision that we should make sure is really clear. And Carol, I'll follow up with you separately about this. Is like if Brighton is pushing for condo minimizing, I think, you know, we need to decide, like, is that something that we're okay with? If so, what are the parameters, and making sure that is crystal clear and like in writing with signatures on it, like a legally binding document as much as we can make one. Or if we're going to push for a Lopez Island based land trust model, creating that proposal and kind of presenting it to Brighton and be like, do you agree or not? If you agree, here's how we expect you to support. But I think us with STAC getting a really, really clear picture of like the land use model, the ownership model, all of these things that Michael has just brought up, like, and Carol, that you've been bringing up too, like how decisions are made, what happens over the long term, things like that. I think if we get that, you know, in paper with our kind of as our final deliverable with the EDI, that's something, yeah, that's something that can be useful for other grant applications. That feels like an incredible use of the EDI investment. I gotta go, but just wanted to kind of land on that thought. So I'll see y'all on Slack. I'll see you later.
Thanks so much, Em.
Bye.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for this because, like, if you guys do something, then we'll all learn them. You know, so it's like, you know, you jumping in there and being like, "We did this thing," then we'll be like, "Oh, I wonder if it's gonna work." Like, but you know, it's tough, right? Because somebody actually has to do it for you to figure out whether, like, are there unintended consequences that nobody understood? You know, can we
Yeah.
mitigate them? What lessons can we learn so other people don't have to go through some things?
Yeah, and I guess my question is kind of piggybacking off of M's sort of vision request for moving forward with like EDI and getting things on paper. Does EDI have resources to support us and STAC on, like, if we were to put together this proposal and this vision, and, you know, does EDI have access to like somebody who can look it over and say like, this actually looks really good, or no, this doesn't actually, in our experience, I don't think it's going to be feasible. I mean, obviously, Michael, you know a lot about these things, but I'm just wondering if there's additional resources.
Yeah, I mean, the city is not going to be super helpful with cities. I mean, we can look it over and give you stuff. I mean, you're gonna need, like, at a certain point, you're gonna need your own lawyer, right? Like we'll get really squirrely about it. And at some point, you know, even despite our best intentions, like the bureaucrat stuff will kick into the back of our mind sort of silently and be like, you're going to get yourself in trouble if you get too excited about this. So, you know, I mean, I think, you know, we're happy to be brainstorming partners, but in terms of like, is this a good contract or not? I don't have that expertise. I will never be able to get the city attorneys to like sign off on like, yes, we're going to give advice to someone who's not the city, which is how they would kind of feel about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just wondering if there were like other people or
yeah, there is
where the limits are for
yeah.
EDI.
There is a woman named Cheryl Markham out there who worked for King County in their housing and community development side for a while, left, and what she's been talking about doing, and I don't know how far along she is about this, is basically she's a lawyer, and basically setting up a firm that specializes in cooperative structures and community ownership structures, and that like that's literally what they would do.
Is it possible for you to send us her contact information via email or some way? Because I'd love to have a conversation with her.
Yeah, I can. Would you like an email introduction or just me to forward over?
That'd be great. Yeah,
Sure.
I really would appreciate that.
Yeah. So I think it would be, you know, I mean, she's trying to set it up as a lawyer cooperative. and then, you know, my mind melted. Like, and then, you know, I guess Washington State is one of those states where, like, instead of having to go to law school, you can intern with a lawyer. And so she's trying to see if they can set up that as a way for BIPOC youth to like access without a ton of debt. So it's a pretty cool idea. You know, and I just don't know how far along she is on it. And I feel like the last time, it was a bit like over a year ago, maybe it was the last time I actually sat down and sort of got the pitch from her. But I think I'm a good person to know, you know. And then obviously, you know, I think we've all had this conversation, but our hope here is that we'll be like resourcing you all soon to be able to actually, you know, bring on some of this support and, you know, cover your own research time and things like that. You know, because usually what we do is just like throw everything we have out right away and then say, okay, do it, you know. We've talked about, I think internally, you know, we go around a lot internally around like, should we just divert some of the grant funds to like having retainers of some people that could be more flexibly used? And I think we haven't quite gotten there with our advisory board around like exactly what that looks like. And usually what happens is we sort of reset to the mean of like, give people grants. That what they want is the grant, right? Like, why are you making this complicated? You just, you know, they'll do what they want with it. Like, why are you adding all of this extra stuff? So that's been sort of holding us back. And then, you know, who gets, yeah, I think you got it there in the chat. So, you know, I mean, it is like that and like grant writing support and things like that. There's like these things that we know that, you know, people could use, and having some good lawyers that we could just call and like build down a retainer for simple questions that are available to more people. But the stuff you're doing, I think, is like pretty deep work. So I don't think you'd get super far with an attorney just being like, oh yeah, it's probably possible. Like, I'm gonna need 25 hours of like case law research to figure out like what this is gonna do, right? Like before I advise you on that. But
All right, y'all. Thanks, Michael. Feel free to stay on. We're just gonna touch base on invoices and any new updates and things like that. And I'm not sure if like if you all want to continue, I can see if I can bring Michael back. You're pretty busy, but
yeah, well, I'm right now I
make it
really
work.
need to pee, so I'm like perfectly happy
And I'm
to
sure
get
you're
12
hungry
minutes.
too.
So,
All right, bye,
it's
Michael.
great to see you all.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Same here. So I'm gonna actually stop recording, Abhishek.